So yesterday I made a video about sound hearing, or the non-dual exploration of sound. Sound is a great entry point into the experience of non-duality. So after watching the video, someone asked a really good question about this. They said that they find it frustrating to hear that sound does the hearing, that there's no hearer, or that there's sound without a hearer, that it just makes no sense, because if there's sound, there's got to be someone hearing it. Or if someone is hearing a sound, then there's got to be that someone there to hear it, right? So it's actually a really good question, because I think a lot of people get tripped up on that. And so I thought an analogy might be helpful. So consider this analogy. If you're sitting on a couch, and next to you on that couch is let's say a 6-month-old toddler, and you're both just minding your own business, not doing anything in particular. You're both just kind of, scrolling through your iPhones and checking your Facebook and, posting on Instagram and kind of chatting with your toddler friends on all their little toddler iPhones. And then suddenly someone turns on some Beethoven. So the sound of Beethoven suddenly permeates the air. Now, from the adult mind, there's a perception that, oh, I'm hearing Beethoven. I wonder who turned on the Beethoven. And perhaps at that moment, you remember that you watched my video, and then you start to ask yourself, well, how does that make sense that there's no one here hearing the Beethoven? Because if there's Beethoven playing this music that I'm hearing right now, there must be me hearing it. How can there be the music without me hearing it? Yeah? And then you might go on to think, well, I know how sound works. There are speakers across the room, and they are causing compressional waves that are traveling through the air and then striking my eardrums, which are transmitted through the auditory nerves to my brain, which is reproducing sound. So that might be your experience. And I think a lot of people probably have this experience, especially when they actually start contemplating non-duality. So here's the thing. Just stand back from that for a moment and look at what I just described. 95% of what occurred for the adult was thought. It was thinking about what's being heard, thinking about who I am as the hearer, thinking about the mechanism of sound. But is any of that at all necessary for the hearing of that sound? What is primary? The sound of Beethoven, just that sound, or all of the thoughts about the sound? For instance, whether there are fewer thoughts or more thoughts about the sound, it doesn't change anything about the sound. It's just what it is. If there are no thoughts about the sound, and you just close your eyes and kind of drift away with the sound, there can be no thoughts at all, or very few thoughts, and the sound is still there. It didn't change at all. So the sound is not contingent upon thought whatsoever. So from there you could ask yourself, well then, is the thought necessary at all? Including the most bare or fundamental sense that I am the hearer of the sound. Now for a lot of people, they can see pretty easily that the conceptual thoughts, the daydreams that are not about the sound. Well, I was thinking about sound, and then I started thinking about science class because that's where I learned about sound. And then you start thinking about Jessie Jenkins and what pretty hair she had. And then you start remembering how you got in trouble after school for riding your BMX bike through the school, and you had to go to detention, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm just thinking a lot. Those are all thoughts. Those have nothing to do with this sound. Those have nothing to do with Beethoven. My mind was wandering. So it's not hard for most people to realize that just random streams of thoughts that carry you off completely out of the present moment really don't have to do, obviously, with the present moment. Beethoven didn't cause that. The sounds in the air have nothing to do whatsoever with the mind just wandering off. And so that's usually not too hard for people to grasp or to recognize. But the more fundamental thoughts, the thoughts that feel intimate, the thoughts that really feel like they're about you, about how you understand things and concepts, even if you can overlook that you heard those and learned those concepts many years ago in science class, those can still be more sticky because it feels like your knowledge. You've identified with that knowledge. And then there's an even more fundamental or closer layer of thought that has to do with what I was talking about in the previous video, which is perception. These are the thoughts that seem to structure our three-dimensional world. But if you look closely enough, they're actually the same thought stuff as conceptual thoughts. They just have more stickiness because we identify with them. So this is actually what shifts with First Awakening. For whatever reason, and however it comes about, and through whatever practice, we're able to pierce that veil of identity where we're identifying as the thinker and thus not recognizing thoughts as an object to the thinker, experiencing that dualistic feeling in thought. We're able to pierce that veil and suddenly experience ourselves as this pure sense of consciousness, the thought stuff itself. And it's vast and expansive and primary and neutral. So this is why it's often hard to experience non-dual or non-duality directly before awakening, because our attention is so quickly bound back into dualistic thought. We're identified with it. It's that simple. There's identity tied around those very close thoughts, the ones that say, I am me, I'm a person, I'm here. But you learned that. At some point, you literally learned about that. You just don't remember it because you've built all kinds of more information and identities and beliefs on top of that. And those very childish beliefs like, oh, I'm a person, oh, I have hands, those don't seem meaningful or relevant to you anymore, but they're there. They're actually the foundation of how you experience everything in the thought world. So by going back through that barrier, through self-inquiry or through other practices I describe in my book, you can breach that veil and things start looking very different. And from there, it's much easier to explore non-duality in a direct way. It's much easier to start to experience what it means to be the sound hearing, or to notice there is only sound hearing and there's no one receiving that. It's a deeply immersive experience. It's more immersive even really than the experience of pure consciousness. So to drive this point home, we'll step back to the beginning of the thought experiment and realize that at the moment Beethoven started playing, the adult started to think about it. Oh, I'm hearing it. Where's the music coming from? Who turned it on? Oh, I know about Beethoven. I remember when I learned about Beethoven. Boy, I sure love this music. It makes me feel so relaxed. Yeah, all thoughts. Thoughts. Now, what's happening for the 6-month-old? Well, we know that that 6-month-old does not have a sense of self. It doesn't experience itself as apart from the environment. And in my book, I explain this in the chapter on mind identification. It's not until about 16 to 18 months old that a child actually experiences itself as a distinct entity. So for that child, there's not a bunch of thinking going on going, oh yeah, I remember when I learned about music and sound and Beethoven, and yeah, I'm here and that sound's out there and the adult's next to me over here. That's not how they experience it. It's just pure experience. It's just that we're referring to when we say Beethoven, that pure experience, that is their experience. They don't have a veil of self between, well, an illusory self and the experience. There's just the experience. So if you can kind of partake in this thought experiment by moving your attention between the experience of the adult, the thinking adult, and seeing how much thought is actually going on and how much they're turning the experience of that sound into thoughts. Now, you can't actually turn them into thoughts, but it sort of appears that way. And compare it to the child. It's not turning anything into anything. It's just, that's just sound. There's just sound happening. That child is just experiencing sound. And they're not aware that they're experiencing it. They're not aware of an eye. They're not aware of a sense of perception. There's just Beethoven, just that sound. They don't differentiate it from feeling. They don't differentiate it from seeing. They don't differentiate it from consciousness. It's just a unified experience. So, as strange as it sounds, especially in deep stage realization, a lot of this is about regressing to childhood. Now, you don't regress in the sense that you're not able to respond to the environment in a nuanced way that reflects your experience. It's just that the immediate moment-to-moment experience of the sense world and of consciousness is non-dualistic. It's not referencing a self. And what's really cool is it's seen very clearly that this is just how it is naturally. It's not a way of thinking. It's not a paradigm. It's the end of paradigms. It's what is experienced directly when paradigms dissolve. It's what is experienced directly when the self-reflective nature of thought ceases, or the identity entanglement with thought ceases. There can still be thoughts. There can still even be a thought that says, oh, I want this. But it's quite a funny thought because you know it doesn't refer to anything. There's no one that refers to at all. And it's blatantly obvious. So a thought can appear, just like a sound can appear, just like a sensation can appear. But they don't appear to somebody. And they don't appear to a perceptive faculty. and they don't appear in awareness. Awareness appears as them, and they appear as awareness. Time and space come into being with appearance. So there's no appearance apart from time and space, and there's no time and space apart from appearance, and there's no perception apart from the perceived, and there's no sound apart from the hearing. There's no color apart from the seeing. There's no thinker apart from the thinking. That's it.